what we saw previously when he got a bit, when there was fears and he was rattling the sabre all the time. Actually, China and India were quite
They were
prominent.
leading, say, don't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Welcome back. I'm speaking to Ben Wallace, former British Defence Secretary. Ben Wallace, let's move on to Ukraine as the other big international story still around. I want to start by getting your comments, though. There was a fringe meeting of the Labour conference, which was addressed by the Arms Forces Minister, Luke Pollard, and he said, talking about more military support for Ukraine, that we've depleted our own stocks. We haven't really got any more to give. Is that true?
Well, we always keep a baseline. We're not emptying our cupboards entirely. We never
The cupboard
did.
is not bare.
It's not bare. We have our own obligations, both to NATO and our own security and our allies. But overall, and as I had always said, part of the hollowing out that had gone on for decades was that these ammo stocks are secret. People don't really know. So, what a convenient place it was for people to make savings. And it wasn't just us; it was right across Europe. I mean, the German ammo stocks would be the similar position. I'm speculating, and so ultimately, I think what he is saying though is that the world's ammunition that has been expended in Ukraine is vast. I think in percentage terms, it's well over double figures, if not nearly half the world's artillery ammunition has been expended in Ukraine or something, because none of us were keeping much in our cupboards. So, I think what he is right to say is that he didn't say it, but what we should recognise is that complex weapons take time to make. Storm Shadows take months to make. You can't rustle them up in a shell factory. And one of the challenges we had in our defence industrial base is we would place an order and then pack up. And I remember when we sent 4,000 NLAWs, the early short-range anti-tank missiles we sent to Ukraine, and I wanted to push for replacements, and I would get challenged in Parliament about why hadn't you? The simple reason it took us about a year and a half to start placing the order was the supply chain of the optics had gone to sleep 20 years ago. You had to start all over again.
But was it also shortage of money that we were depleting our stockpiles to help Ukraine? We still always keep a base for our own forces for the unexpected, but we didn't rebuild the stockpiles in the way we did because there wasn't enough money in the budget.
Well, no, we did. And one of the last things I did before I stood down was £500 million for our 155 shell factory up in the northeast of England and Wales. And then also we started, I remember placing an order with the Norwegians and somebody else, I think, Finns maybe, for more NLAWs. So we started to place the orders, but we could only do that when the manufacturer said, oh, hang on, now we've found a supplier, so we can do it. So we have started to do that. And some of them are already being rolled off the production line, some of the anti-aircraft missiles that have been really important. But it took time to warm up. And, yesterday I was speaking at a complex weapons conference in Coventry, and I asked the people there, has the big manufacturer in the UK, MBDA, have they actually done as we'd asked them to, which is double or treble their production line? And the good news is they have, rather than sort of taking the order and then stringing it out. So we are on that process. We are building it up. But also we've been doing other things with Ukraine, and the Labour government's done the same, which is we've been going out buying it from around the world if we didn't have it. And we've been doing that. That's some of those amounts we announced, and we found all sorts of ways of buying from all sorts of allies to do that. And also we've been funding some indigenous growth missile systems in Ukraine.
President Zelensky is heading to the US this week. He's going to meet President Biden. He wants to sell his victory plan, as he calls it, which is to convince Mr. Biden to mark his last months in office by arming Ukrainians with weapons they say they need to get Putin's attention, bring him to the table. It would include granting the use of the UK Storm Shadow missiles you mentioned by the Ukrainian forces with the ability to fly them in to hit targets in Russia itself. The Prime Minister seems keen on this, but Mr. Biden doesn't. Do you agree that we should let our missiles be used in that way?
Yeah, I do. And when I was Defence Secretary, we authorised the use of them in Crimea. And if you listen and read Putin, he believes Crimea is Russia. He once gave a speech where he said Crimea is Russian, Russia is Crimea. So in his mind, Russia's already been hit by it.
Yes.
My view is this is about international law. International law says they are allowed to strike Russian targets in Russia if they are prosecuting the war. They can't pick a random base on the other side of the continent. and that's what war we've got to hold on to, which is the belief in international law, and that's our shield. But there is another debate which I have often tried to raise, and it's sort of gone into the background, which is your earlier point about stocks. The most important for Ukraine is that they have enough stocks of deep strike capability, and Germany has the Taurus missile.
Which is not sending.
Olaf Scholz has refused to send it.
The Chancellor, yes.
He could send it and still say you can't use it in Russia, but it would give Ukraine a sizable stock of them to defend in Ukraine. Britain sent ours, Italy has, France has. I think it's perfectly acceptable that Germany does, but he's continued to refuse to do so. And to me, that's more of the political argument to have and the argument to win than actually one or two Storm Shadows fired into Russia.
Of course, every time we're asked by the Ukrainians to provide a new type of weapon, the F-16 from the Americans, Storm Shadow, the Challenger tanks, British Challenger, we get a threat from Putin. You know, like we're on the brink of nuclear war. And in some cases, he does seem to intimidate people. But I wanted to ask you this. What is the risk? What would the consequence be if Mr. Putin deployed tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons in the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think, first of all, that would be a global game changer. It would break something we call the nuclear taboo, that since the Second World War, no one has ever used a nuclear weapon. And that nuclear taboo is very, very important in underwriting deterrent, and that the international community will not tolerate the use of a nuclear weapon. If he was to use it, and it's a rather it's a very misleading and always a disturbing description, a tactical nuclear weapon. I mean, some of these are 10 times bigger than Hiroshima, right? I mean, it's not, it's a very bizarre sort of, abstract discussion, because it would be a very horrific thing no matter what size it is. And I don't think there's such a thing as, but ultimately it would force the Western powers to have to think how they could reassert the nuclear taboo. How do they make sure it never happens? At a smaller scale, but also an equally important scale, you see it when the use of chemical weapons happens. Remember when Syria used chemical weapons, Britain, France, and America struck some of those Syrian launch sites, if I was remembering correctly, and it was very important to send that message. So that will be a challenge for the West, but they would have to do something. But I also think what we saw previously, when he got a bit, when there was fears and he was rattling the sabre all the time, actually China and India were quite...
They were leading, say, don't do it.
Yeah, because they see the difficulty of it. Yeah. And I think, for now, I think he's not. And we did see in the media this week a launch of a silo-launched missile. It was going to be clearly a show of force. It blew up in the silo and basically destroyed the launch site. So I think he's probably discovering that, a bit like his frontline tanks, they don't seem to have what it says on its tin.
They're not quite as built.
So I don't think he's going to go there. I think he's going to simply rely on an international community and a Donald Trump presidency flaking. And I think he's also going to rely on the fact he can just sacrifice more of his own people.
Because he doesn't care.
He doesn't care.